Hello and welcome to Seconds Out Live. I'm not sure quite what happened to our intro there. It didn't seem to appear for me. I don't know if it did for you guys out there, but teething problems aside, I'm delighted to be joined once again by, I should call him Danny Gilfillan in because he's still here helping out in the absence of Mr. Raymond Khan. It's Danny Gilfillan. Danny, how you doing?
All good, mate. All good. What's happened to Eamon? 2 weeks in a row missing the show. I've been informed he splashed out on a new car recently as well. I think it's all getting to his head a bit, Danny.
He's going around joyriding, calling people bus wankers as he flies past the bus stop. That's what I think it is. Yeah, good to see you again, mate. And we've got a lot to talk about this week, all centered around a knockout Saturday night. Unfortunately, didn't go the way of the juggernaut. Joe Joyce fell once again to Chinese power, as our strapline says there. Zhilei Zhang, or Zhilei Zhang, I heard it pronounced this week. So maybe I've been saying it wrong all the time, but then Big Bang Zhang doesn't really make sense, doesn't rhyme. That aside, not really that important, obviously. Yeah, Joe Joyce fell once again, this time a lot earlier in the fight to Zhang, and devastating right hook to finish it. But Joe, for me, never seemed at the races in the rematch. What did you make of it, Danny?
No, you're bang on, mate. That first round, obviously, not a lot happened, but he looked, I hate to call fighters scared, so I'll use the word wary. He looked extremely wary of Zhang. Don't think he landed anything of note, maybe a couple of light jabs to the body, and then as soon as Zhang landed the sort of first half clean straight left in the second round, it all began to quickly unravel and look a lot like the second fight. So yeah, tough night for him, tough one to come back from.
We'll talk about that fight in further detail as we go on, but just to let you know, this is SO Live. We pride ourselves on being the most interactive show on boxing YouTube. So please, if you can, like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. But most importantly, submit your comments and questions through the live chat. We'll get to as many of those as we can. We'll be here probably between half an hour and an hour. That's usually how it pans out. But as I said, there is a lot to talk about. I think a few of you have already started making some comments. Sugar Ray 29 insists Joe is not finished. He can come again after one or two comeback fights. We're going to be talking about the future for both men in due course, but we're going to talk a little bit more about the fight first. Ray 74 says, Joe is too slow to trouble the top heavyweights. Yeah, I'm not sure it was speed necessarily that defeated him against Zhang, but that is something we will talk about. For me, Joe never seemed to quite know what he should be doing in the set. Well, you could argue in both fights with Zhang, but he was trying to parry that left hand, obviously scarred deeply, both literally and figuratively, by that left hand in the first fight. Caused his eye to swell up and the fight ultimately being called off. And he seems to be trying to parry it with his right hand throughout, but just seemed to be about a second or more too slow to do so, and was still getting caught. And then Zhang threw the left hand, just before the finish. Joe went to counter over the top of it with his own right and got clocked with a hellacious right hook from the southpaw stance. But just seemed to be tentative, apprehensive. I know a lot of people have talked about the weight as well. It'd be good to get your view on that, Danny, because everyone said he was too light going into the first fight. Well, he was a career heaviest going into the rematch, and that didn't seem to do him any good either. What did you make of it? And was that just kind of a bit of a red herring, the whole weight talk?
Yeah, I must say I was very surprised when I saw the weigh-in on Friday coming in at a career heaviest. It's been said loads of times, almost 2 stone heavier than the first time. And I just find it all a bit bizarre because the first fight he's come in nearly as light as he's ever had and walked straight at Zhang. And then the second fight he's come in a career heaviest and tried to avoid him and go on the back foot. So I'm not really sure if he's had that game plan or abandoned the game plan mid-fight or what's going on. Obviously I'd hate to be one to criticise a trainer as long in the tooth and as respected as Neil Salas, but I'm just really not sure what the thinking was on the weight in either fight. It just didn't correspond to what he was doing in the ring at all. And I'm not necessarily saying if the game plan was different and more congruent with the weight that he would have beat Zhang, definitely not, but you'd have to imagine he would have given a better account of himself than that.
Pronounced that correctly, almost certainly haven't, because I might not be able to do somersaults, but I am able to move my head independently from my body. Yeah, that's obviously referring to Joe's capoeira background and path as a male cheerleader as well. And yeah, I can't do either, so I'm not going to criticise too harshly. But yeah, we'll talk about the lack of head movement perhaps in a minute. Dell says Joe's tactics were wrong. They basically thought it was all about weight, and he piled on the pounds, looked fat. I mean, if that's fat, God, I must look enormous. I'll probably do. So no comments on that, thanks. Slowed him down and was too much of a... Came in so sluggish, it was extreme weight changes and clearly couldn't be at optimal fitness. They believed he was strong enough to absorb it. Terrible, really. Yeah, I mean, it is hard to say because they've gone back to camp. They've said, you know, it looked like Joe didn't know what he was doing, didn't know how to box a southpaw. From what I'm aware of, he got a lot of quality southpaw sparring this time around. Brought people out from the UK. There was plenty out in Vegas as well. So maybe that kind of trying to parry with the right hand, moving laterally, maybe that stuff was working against the guys in camp. But Zhang, for someone as huge as he is, has got really fast hands. And I think that's always going to be a problem for anyone he goes up against. He's not got the fastest feet, and neither's Joe, in fairness, but he has got fast hands and clearly carries power in both hands as well. So it was a tough one there for Joe. On the head movement thing, yeah, I mean, ideally, you would be slipping shots and throwing off those slips, throwing counters off of them. But I think when you've spent most of your career, both amateur and pro, and Joe's been in the game a long time, if you add all that together, it's kind of hard to adjust your style completely in a short space of time. Because I know people say, oh, well, it's just head movement. Amateurs can do head movement. When you first start in the gym, it's one of the first things they teach you. It's true, but if you don't, it's like muscle memory. You get into a rhythm with your head movement, and if you don't keep doing it over and over in every fight you have, every camp you have, you'll quickly fall out of the habit. And especially in high pressure situations, both, you know, big fights and when you're under pressure in the ring itself, you're going to revert back to what you're comfortable with. And we haven't seen Joe employ a lot of deft head movement since he's turned pro. So it always seemed a big ask for him to change his style to that extent in such a short time between fights. What did you make of it kind of tactically and technically?
Yeah, I've thought the best sort of route to success for Joyce in this fight is to try and be all the way in on Zhang, like take away his room to land those shots, you know, make it messy and then try and drain the gas tank that way. I mean, it's no secret that Zhang feigns a lot in the second half of fights, but it just seems like getting him there is the most difficult thing. But you know, sometimes you just come up against someone who's got your number, and just with the weight, Joe said in the aftermath of the first fight that he'd sort of started to believe the whole juggernaut thing, and he's thinking, maybe I do have this uncrackable chin. And once that happened, he probably started blaming the weight for why he didn't take the shots as well. But Zhang's by far the biggest puncher he's come up against as a professional, like not even close. And not just that, he's an accurate puncher. He's a really accurate puncher. And as you say, Danny, got very fast hands. And thing is, with that first fight, for the damage he done and having hurt Joyce in the second round particularly, he never actually landed clean on the chin and was still doing that. So, I mean, I hate to like toot my own horn, but I thought this was on the cards early, like a conclusive stoppage. And, you know, that was the first clean shot he landed in the chin, and we all saw what happened.
Thunder Road asks, where is Eamon? Eamon is currently on annual leave, which he returns from tomorrow, and he'll be covering the Boxer show at the weekend and throughout fight week as well. I hope that's not a complaint, though, because we're more than happy to have Danny Gilfillan filling in once again. Dell says, I was really hoping for Joe to win. Final point, I don't like him saying I took a risk and maybe should have waited. That niggles me, because then you're one, waiting for a paycheck, and two, you can't call yourself a true champion if you avoid fighters just to wait for an easier option. Dell, the only thing I'd say, mate, if you're gonna split your point into two separate messages, and I understand you have to because of the character limit, try and be a bit quicker on the old keyboard so we don't have other people's chats going in between. Bogdan Dinu, who I'm sure is not the heavyweight who fought Daniel Dubois and Nathan Gorman, among others, says, you think there should be an age limit to turn pro? ? Joyce spent all his prime years wearing the GB vest, did win a silver medal at the Olympics, of course. But how much more could he have achieved in the pros if he turned over early? I think that's quite a valid point, actually, Bogdan. I'm almost disappointed you're not the heavyweight now. You know, Joe did stay amateur for a long time. He always wanted that Olympic medal, and he got it, credit to him. But it does embed you in that amateur style. And then he was fast-tracked partly because of his age and you know, to the top, to number one contender status as a heavyweight. And he was blowing a lot of people out as well. Decent people as well. Joe's obviously a powerful guy. And he never really truly maybe adapted his style. Excuse me, had to sneeze. But yeah, never really adapted his style to the extent that you would like, especially with the head movement and maybe a bit faster footwork as well. We talked a lot about Joyce and his kind of flaws that he showed in the fight, but as Danny pointed out there, Zhang is a very good fighter and showed it once again. One thing I did see was that in the first fight, as you said, he never landed clean on the chin and still caused a lot of damage. I thought he started a lot faster this time around, a lot more aggressive. It was like as if he knew he could land on Joe and he knew he could cause damage when he did. So he didn't see the sense in waiting around. And for someone who there remain question marks around his gas tank, it's probably not the worst thing to try and get the fight over as quickly as possible. Danny.
Oh, sorry, mate. Yeah, I thought you were going to comment. Yeah, without a doubt.
I was letting you jump in there.
As I said, sort of when we were doing the preview for this fight, I think the stuff about Zhang's gas tank has been exaggerated slightly, but he definitely doesn't have a good gas tank. I think when we see an upset, and you sort of forget how big an upset that was at the time. I mean, Joe Joyce was something like 1-12 to beat Zhang the first time round. We sort of, no matter how the defeat or how the upset happens, we sort of automatically think, even if it is like as one-sided as the first time, you're going to see like somehow that the Brit, the favourite, will overturn it. And yeah, Zhang's a really, really good fighter. I think if heavyweight fights were for one reason or other limited to 6 rounds, Zhang would be a very, very difficult man to beat.
Yeah, Dell says, I tried, sorry, dude, about getting the messages concurrent or in order. That's all right, Dell. We're all friends again now. You just had to apologise and acknowledge your mistake. It's no problem. Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one because there didn't seem to be much Joyce could do to adapt. He didn't have it within his capabilities and his skill set to do or to adopt the style that would have most troubled Zhang. You know, you need to be a bit more technically sound. I think maybe he could have popped his jab out a bit harder rather than, you know, he seemed tentative about getting caught with counters by the faster man, and you can't blame him for that. But he didn't do much to keep Zhang off him with those kind of feeling out jabs that he was throwing. And as you said, the shots to the body as well. You know, he could have thrown heavier artillery, trying to warm his way into the fight before the exchanges began. But we never really got to see that because he was taken out early. And if his whole plan was to, you know, stay safe for the first 4 to 6 rounds, as we thought it was, and pile it on late and, you know, use his greater engine, we'll never know if that could have happened now. And there's definitely not going to be a third fight, I wouldn't think, between the two of them. I think the 2 victories, particularly the second one, was conclusive. So thoughts now turn to what happens next for both men. Just before we get to that, Bogdan Dinu again says, Joyce looked like I'd expect Ngannou to look versus Fury. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one. I'm not sure. I think that's doing Joe a bit of a disservice, to be fair. But yeah, Fury is going to come up in the next part of our talk, actually, because he's been talked about as a potential future opponent for Zhilei Zhang, of course. Interesting one. But then we saw Eddie Hearn make some comments. I don't know if it was yesterday or today. He's been out in Florida, of course. And he said that Zhang is now a possibility for Anthony Joshua if they can't make the long-discussed Deontay Wilder fight. So we're going to have to see what pans out there. But yeah, as we said there, Fury versus Zhang or Joshua goes to China. Because Eddie Hearn said, of course we go to China. We'll go wherever makes the most money. And given Zhang a homecoming fight, he's obviously a national hero after his own prowess in the Olympics, plus what he's done as a pro. Hugely populous nation, you know, starved in some senses of top-level, high-level sport. You've got to imagine it will do huge figures, both TV figures there and money through the turnstiles. You know, why not? Why not go out to China? I can't see Tyson Fury doing it, if I'm honest. I think if there's a Fury fight, it'll be in the Middle East or it'll be here in the UK. But if Joshua and Hearn, at least on his behalf, have stated he's willing to go out there, interesting stuff. What would you prefer to see, Danny? Zhang against Joshua or Zhang against Fury?
Oh, don't know. I would, just because it's maybe more likely to be in China, as you say, the idea of Zhang getting his homecoming at the Bird's Nest potentially holds, I think, close to 100,000. I mean, that would be a serious spectacle. I don't see it happening, despite what Eddie said, that they would happily make the fight and this and that. And I would hate to ever accuse Eddie Hearn of not really telling the truth, but I just think that's a really, really tough fight for Anthony Joshua at the stage of his career he's in. And mean, don't want to turn this into an Anthony Joshua episode, but the sort of mentalities and it's been sort of done to death. I can't see that happening. Zhang and his team seem to be very keen on the Tyson Fury fight. I mean, it was telling that even though he's WBO interim champion and soon to be U6 mandatory, Fury is the only name coming out of his mouth. Potentially could happen. I mean, both under the Queensberry banner now. I mean, Frank Warren's turned from Joe Joyce promoter to Zhilei Zhang's promoter very quickly over the past couple of days, so I wouldn't rule it out.
Yeah, Ian Watson says Zhang is very fluid and naturally quick with excellent technique. This has been developed over the years in the amateurs. And I think that's an important point because I noted perhaps, and someone else noted in the chat, that perhaps Joyce stayed amateur for too long. And that's embedded some bad habits or at least habits not suitable for the pro game. But then on the flip side, Zhang has honed some of his techniques that he's needed in the pro side of the sport as a long-time world-class amateur. Dell, he's managed to do 2 in a row here, so well done. I love people who can learn from their errors. Says a lot of what Frank Warren has been saying for months now seems to be coming to fruition. He's been telling everyone Wilder AJ isn't happening, no test for Ben, but Hearn and Co continue to blag us. Then he says, oh, maybe we take the Zhang option for AJ. I mean, a couple of points on that. I would say that there's every chance that Zhang is being mentioned, particularly in China, where it is a very lucrative option by Eddie Hearn, because then it puts a little bit more pressure on Wilder and the people working with him to make the Joshua fight. You know, I think that's still their number one priority. He said that Wilder's the more dangerous fight, but Zhang is still dangerous. I would probably go along with that, certainly for Joshua's style. I think Joshua stylistically doesn't match up too badly with Zhang. I think against Wilder, it's a very tough ask. So I think there's a little bit of kind of negotiating ploy there. And, you know, we've got this other option. It's out in China. We can make loads of money. He's not quite as scary as you are, but, you know, we'd be willing to take it. I'm slipping into Eddie Hearn voice here by accident. We'd be willing to take it if, you know, the Wilder fight can't be made. And that puts a bit more pressure on Wilder and his team to, you know, sort things out, whatever the hurdles are, and overcome them. And on the Frank Warren side, you know, Daniel Dubois was his big hope. He still is, perhaps, you know, he's still quite young. He fought Joyce in a fight they fully expected Dubois to win, but they had both under contract. Joyce came through, then they got behind Joyce, got Zhang under contract after the first, or co-promotional deal with Zhang after the first fight with Joyce. And now they can move on with Joyce move on with Zhang. And that's presumably an easy-ish fight to make with Tyson Fury, as they're both working with Frank Warren anyway. Do you think there was anything, Danny, in the Joe Joyce rematch from Zhang that will not scare, but will unsettle Tyson Fury, that he'll be concerned about?
I'm not too sure. I mean, Tyson, I know a lot of people think he's scared of Usyk. I think it's just more he wants to make as much money as possible, and the Ngannou thing was sort of presented in his lap, and he's took that whilst it's there. Zhang, he'll be well aware, is a difficult fight. I mean, Fury is a bit of a historian of boxing. He'll be well aware of the challenges Zhang poses. You would still make Fury a fairly sizable favourite, although saying that, like if Wilder is able to land, and obviously Wilder's explosive and probably is more one-punch power than Zhang, I think that's fair to say. Zhang's a lot better technically. He's got a lot more means of landing his power. He's better at setting up shots. And if Wilder can knock you down 4 times in the space of 3 fights, like, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that Zhang will be able to catch him as well. So I don't think it's a fight Fury will be running scared from, but I doubt he would be taking it as lackadaisically as he did Derek Chisora, for example.
Well, yeah. Cardiac Kip says, not a Fury fan, but he would box the shit out of Zhang. Shit out of Zhang is very hard to say. I didn't realise until I started reading it. Yeah, I agree. Boxing 24/7 says Zhang dangerous with both hands. Fury wouldn't be able to use lateral movement as well as he does with one-handed fighters. Yeah, that's an interesting point, but I think Zhang is a bit slow of foot in comparison to Fury, and also perhaps Wilder as well. Wilder's not got the best footwork, but he's quite quick on his feet. You know, he's quite nimble. And I'm not sure, and so is Fury, of course, moving in both directions. And Fury can obviously switch hit as well. Zhang's a dangerous southpaw, but Fury can go southpaw as well if he chooses. I don't know if that'd be a wise idea against a gifted natural left-hander in Zhilei Zhang. But watching it and seeing some of the mistakes Joyce made, I did kind of think I could see Fury enjoying this sort of fight. I could see him outboxing Zhang, and I could see him picking him off as he comes in, forcing him to lead off so he could counter. Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be without its dangers, of course, as Boxing 24/7 underlines. Zhang can hit hard with both hands, but I would fancy Fury quite strongly in that fight. Whereas AJ, I think that's more of a 50-50. That's more of a pick 'em. Well, what if you had to pick right now, Danny? Who would you go for in both of those fights? So Zhang against Fury and against AJ.
I would favour Fury, first of all, don't get it twisted. But the only thing, it's been a long time since we've seen Fury sort of get up on his heels and go on the back foot. There's no guarantees he'd be able to do that for 12 rounds. I still think he could potentially beat Zhang, standing and having it with him. I think he would have a much better gas tank than Zhang. Fury's got exceptional levels of fitness, and I still would favour him. I've got to be honest, I would favour Zhang to stop Anthony Joshua in the first half of the fight if that happened now. I mean, that Helenius fight, the first 3-4 rounds, he was getting tagged and ended up busted up by Helenius, who, with no disrespect, is a faded former European level fighter who got knocked out by Wilder in a round. Zhang, he's a southpaw with similar dimensions in terms of height and reach to Helenius. He hits a lot harder. He's got a lot faster hands. I would think Anthony Joshua would really struggle against Zhilei Zhang, and yeah, I would have Zhang 60%, 70%. I would be favouring him, I think.
And to do it in the first half of the fight as well.
Yeah.
Has Joshua lost in the first half of the fight before? Like, when did he lose against Ruiz?
No, that was what, was it 8-9 by the time it got waved off?
Wow. So you're predicting history will be made, and not the type of history that Anthony Joshua would like.
No.
Wow. So Del, if you contribute any more to the live chat, we might have you in as the next replacement co-host. No offense to Danny, he's doing a fine job. But he says, I'm not too fussed about the Fury fight, but don't get the hate being thrown his way. He's getting 50 mil plus for Ngannou, presumably. No mandatories. All fighters say needs to secure our future because time is limited, so people need to get off his back, as he will fight again in January anyway, as all his mandatories will be called. Well, he's only got one mandatory to be called, hasn't he? He's only the WBC champion, so there's not all his mandatories. But yeah, I mean, hopefully he will fight soon after Ngannou in an actual boxing match in the defense of his titles. I know the WBC are considering the mandatory situation in November, so we hope they find someone for him. I'm sure a lot of people would love a crack at the famous green belt. I think the WBC have been too lenient so far. Maybe lenient's not the right word. Maybe they've just struggled with the bureaucracy side and creating a mandatory challenger or elevating a mandatory challenger. But yeah, I mean, we want to see Fury in proper action. And Zhang, if they can't make the Usyk undisputed fight, I think Zhang's as good a challenge as any. Who else would you like to see Zhang fight, Danny, if it's not going to be Fury or AJ? What would be a good next fight for him? Is it just wait for Usyk?
I mean, in terms of if we're living in sort of fantasy land here, the Wilder fight's a really intriguing fight. You've got two of the biggest punchers in the division, probably the two biggest, in my opinion. Certainly that have established themselves at that sort of level. Zhang, obviously, superior technically, better defense, southpaw, but Wilder, can turn his lights off at any time. That's a fight I would love to see. Aside from that, in terms of like a realistic option, the winner of that Wallin-Gassiev fight, potentially, if he does have to win it out, that's an interesting fight. There's two good heavyweights fighting this weekend, actually. Queensberry don't really have much else for them, so you would have to be drafting an international opponent, I would think. But he'll be well aware of what's happened to Joe Joyce and giving him a shot, and they'll be very cautious to learn from Joyce's mistakes. So I think they'll be very careful if it is anyone else other than a sort of mega fight.
Tony Outdoors says Chisora versus Joyce or White is a good fight. Yeah, we're going to start talking about Joyce's future or lack of, for those who think he should retire. So first of all, Danny, what was your immediate reaction when you saw the rematch results, when you saw Joe counted out? Did you immediately think, right, that's it, it's over for him? Or did you think he can carry on, there's still plenty of big fights out there?
Well, my immediate reaction was buzzing because I got a bet up. But after that, it was, first of all, I think it's remarkable that Joyce made it to his feet even close to the 10 count after that landed. That is one of the biggest shots I've seen land on the chin of a heavyweight from a 20-stone man. So that was pretty incredible. I felt for him, I really felt for him because I spoke to him once or twice before, and he's really sound, and that's the sort of what you get from anyone when you speak about Joe Joyce. And it was a fight he didn't need to take, the first one, and he'll be kicking himself, and it really is difficult to see him getting back in the world title contention. In terms of carrying on and the health implications, that's obviously something for him and his team and those close to him. As a British heavyweight, there's always going to be big paydays on the table. I mean, Derek Chisora's got mentioned in the chat there. I mean, you look at him, he's got 13 losses and still securing paydays well into the six figures. So, of course, there'll be options there for him. It's just that classic trade-off. It's basically your money for your health. Like, that's the long and short of it. So, I'm not sure.
Right, I just want to say to anyone who's just joined us, this is SO Live. We're the most interactive show on boxing YouTube. So please do like, comment, subscribe. But most importantly, submit your comments and questions via the live chat, and we'll get through as many as we can. As our good friend Del will tell you, we have got through quite a lot of chats already. And talking of the man himself, he says, don't think Joyce should retire. Rematch versus Dubois, and if he loses that, then realistically he should retire, as he's only going to be a 10-rounder for upcoming fighters like Fraser Clark, for example. Yeah, I mean, my first reaction was I'd like to see him pack it in. He's probably not going to win a world title now, as much as I hate to write off anyone's dreams. He's won an Olympic silver medal, which is a great achievement considering he started in the sport quite late. A source close to Joyce, who I cannot name, well, I can, but I'm not going to because it wouldn't be right, said they feel from looking at the fight and the first Zhang fight as well that his punch resistance may well have gone, and that they believe financially he has earned enough that he could comfortably retire. And also Joyce, despite what some people might think, having seen a few of his interviews where he maybe takes a little while to process the information that's being thrown at him, he is a very intelligent man. He's already done a number of things in his life aside from boxing. He's a gifted artist. He's gifted with computers as well. He's got a lot of strings to his bow. So if he did decide to pack it in, regardless of whether he's set up for life from boxing, he could turn his attention to other areas. He's still a relatively young man. He might not be in boxing terms, but in the wider scope of life, he certainly is. And there's loads he can do. For me, it's more like Thomas Hauser's argument about Anthony Joshua retiring. It's not that he can't win big fights. It's not that he's got any signs of CTE or anything like that. It's just the fact that he's gone, Hauser's opinion on AJ, my opinion on Joyce, he's gone probably as high as he's going to go now. He's in a position where he can retire safely and not risk further punishment and further damage. Why not retire? And I guess the answer to that, you'd really have to ask Joyce, but presumably it would be still loving the sport, still loving the glory, still loving packing out arenas or stadiums. It is a trade-off, isn't it? But I would fear for him if he carries on, particularly if his punch resistance has gone. And I certainly wouldn't like, as Del alludes to there, I certainly wouldn't like him becoming a gatekeeper or a doormat for the likes of, as nice as they are, Fraser Clark or David Adelaide or Fabio Wardley. But you've got to look at how can you match Joyce in a way that's financially suitable for him, but at the same time doesn't risk his health or his reputation. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it is a really tricky one. And if people in and around Joyce are sort of questioning his punch resistance, I mean, then he really does need to think about it, because that's what he's dined out on. His cardio and having that sort of thud and power has got him where he is, and that's always kind of the way he fights. I know he boxed a bit more against Dubois, but aside from that, we've not really seen that. And I think it wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility if Joyce was to hang about that he could be manoeuvred into a vacant title shot. But that's if you've got a promoter who's really backing you and willing to pay for opponents who are favourably ranked. And by all indications, that doesn't strike me as something Frank Warren's going to be particularly willing to do. I mean, he talked about domestic matchups, like that's the Dubois rematch essentially. So yeah, I mean, it'll be a difficult one for him, because I'm sure 6 months ago he was in his head counting down the days to his world title shot. So it's going to be difficult to process and even more difficult to reach a decision to retire. But as you say, for someone like him who does have other things they can do and other ways to support themselves, and who has made, you would imagine, a considerable amount of money, it's definitely something that he should have a good long hard think about.
I mean, one of the problems Warren has now is that when he first matched Dubois and Joyce, obviously that was to propel Dubois, but I think there was also the side kind of benefit that even though Dubois lost, he was young enough and kind of fresh enough in the pro game to come again. If they rematch now, there's no good outcome for Frank Warren, except for the show itself, which would make whatever amount of money. Because if Joyce loses again to someone he's beaten previously, that's clear regression, I guess, but also improvement on Dubois' part. And he can kind of hitch his wagon to Dubois and see how he gets on. But he's already been found out to an extent by Usyk. Joyce would then probably retire. If Joyce repeats his victory over Dubois, though, Joyce is never going to get back to world title level, I wouldn't think, even if he beats Dubois a second time. You just have to say he's got Dubois' number. But it could end Dubois' career while he's still in his 20s. So I'm not sure there's a happy outcome there, really, beyond the actual event itself. Bogdan Dinu says, is Joyce not good enough to be elite, but too good to be a feasible journeyman, high-level contender worth risking? I'd pick him to beat Ward, Lee, Clark, Adelaide for the next 5 years at least. I think that's probably a bit too much. I don't know if Joyce is going to be around for another 5 years, given his age and the kind of miles on the clock. But also, I think you'd back at least one of those three, if not more, to have improved enough within 5 years to beat a Joe Joyce that you'd have to say will start to be on the downslide regardless, even if he doesn't slip quite to the level those three are at now. Tony Outdoor says, like Chisora, Joyce would be a good fight for upcoming heavyweights. Yeah, but look how many people complain about Chisora and the punishment he takes and the age he is and how many big paydays he's had, and he's still fighting. And I think in Chisora's case, maybe it isn't for the money. Maybe it is because he loves the sport, or at least it's both. But I don't want to see that. We see Chisora, I know some people say he was already slurring before boxing and stuff. I don't know how true that is. Having interviewed him over the years, I do think there is, a gradual regression in his speech. It's not terrible, but I'd certainly like to see him retire. I would have liked to have seen him retire before the Pulev fight, which seems silly because he won it, of course. But I just think once you know you're not going to win a world title, and we saw against Fury quite clearly the gap in levels there between Chisora and that upper echelon. I think you should walk away. But this isn't a Chisora episode, of course. But yeah, I mean, I would like to see Joyce walk away, but it's obviously got to be his decision. Dell says, fighters always believe they have it. History repeats, we never learn. List is endless where so many fighters went on too long and suffer later on. I couldn't agree more. There's, especially now that people who do suffer from pugilistic dementia and CTE and so on, they're coming to the fore more often. We see that now because people that were taking huge amounts of punishment when they sparred a lot more often, they fought a lot more often in the older times of boxing, the older eras. We now see them in old age struggling and so on. So it's not like fighters today can say they're completely unaware of the risks. I think right now we know what the risks are. The boxers know what the risks are. So if someone like a Joe Joyce or a Derek Chisora is going to continue with their careers, that's purely their choice. I would never think we should make that decision for them, but they have to accept that they are risking their future. And for someone like Joe Joyce, who has talked before of wanting a family one day, and at the moment, I don't believe he's married or has kids or whatever. He's saving that till the end of his boxing career. You don't want to be in a position where you're struggling with your health in later life, especially someone who's intelligent like Joyce and can do other things. I'm not saying there are other boxers who aren't intelligent. I'm just saying, Joyce is clearly accomplished in other areas and doesn't need to box necessarily. Ian Watson says, you have to know when to leave the party, which is apparently a Ray Boom Boom Mancini quote. Yeah, I mean, definitely. Teach says, if he has no other job outside of boxing, he has to keep boxing for a while. Yeah, Teach, I don't know if you caught this a little bit earlier, but I was speaking to someone quite close to Joyce recently, and he said financially, Joyce is in a position where he can retire. He can live off what he's earned. He's invested wisely. So I'm not sure that's the case. But also, Joyce is in a position where he can do other things. He's very good with computers. He's very good at other sports. He's done some teaching in terms of sports and boxing and so on as well. He's a gifted artist. I think he sold his work for good money in the past. So there's a number of options open to him. He could even retrain and do stuff. He's got enough money he doesn't need to work for at least a year or two. So he could completely change the direction of his life. But again, this can only come from the fighter. So it's very hard to say. I mean, Danny, do you have kind of a personal view on it? How much are you able to separate the kind of sympathy or empathy with boxers from, individual decisions, civil liberties, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, as you alluded to there, we live in a free country, and provided they pass medical checks, which, I mean, as a side note, you touched on Chisora still fighting. I'd love to know what these medical checks are, if he's getting approved to fight time and time again. I mean, you touched on a slur of the speech. I think it's clear to see there's some sort of cognitive decline there. But with Joyce, he's obviously not at that stage yet. You wouldn't have thought. I mean, he's to an elite heavyweight, but if people close to him are saying that, I mean, it is a tricky one, especially, like, I was at an after dinner show last month or so, and Frank Bruno was there, and he's not one you hear spoke about as, like this case for CTE, but it wasn't pretty, Danny, to be honest. Like, there was clear cognitive decline there. And he's not a fighter who, had like a Danny Williams, went on 10, 15 fights too late. He retired sort of close to his prime, and he's still suffering. And I know by what I've listened to, people who obviously know a lot more than me speak about it, it's a bit of a lottery. You know what I mean? A fighter can go have 50, 60 fights and be fine. I mean, I seen an interview with George Chavallo not that long ago, who's known as being a glutton for punishment, and he was so articulate, but that's not going to be the case for everyone. And when it comes to your brain and your function and your quality of life, you have to be so careful.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. There are elements of that with Frank Bruno 10, 15 years ago, and I can't imagine it's got any better since then. I think they used to do a lot more sparring in those days as part of their camps, and I think the sparring used to be a lot more brutal than it is in general now. I know it varies from gym to gym and fighter to fighter, but yeah, I mean, I don't think that helped. But yeah, I mean, there's loads of cases like that, and they didn't know as much about it then because there was no case history. There's not as many excuses now. R.C says won't need to work for a year or two, maybe a figure of speech. Yeah, I mean, when he says Joe doesn't need to work, it probably doesn't mean he can retire and live forever without working. But, he can take a year or two off and be comfortable. Dell says the Parker fight clearly had its toll on Joyce's career. He took a battering regardless of the victory. Rocky versus Drago moment in real life. R.C says, don't think he would need to work for some years with the amount he's made in the last few years. Yeah, completely right. Tony Outdoors says, I'd be interested if the young guy would like to see head guards introduced in pro boxing. The young guy, I'd love it if he met me. I'll put that to you in a minute, Danny, but I just want to get to Jump Tube's question here. He says, who persuaded Joyce to take on the Zhang fight in the first place rather than push to be the mandatory for the WBO? Answer to that is your problem. And I agree. Yeah, I mean, it's easy to be smart in hindsight. And as Danny pointed out, Joyce was 1-12 favourite for the first Zhang fight. So, while there were people out there that predicted Zhang would win, he certainly wasn't the favourite going in. But what I would say is Joyce was in a very difficult position and a similar position to the one that Dillian Whyte was in when he was the WBC mandatory, in that you have to retain your position, which means you have to be active. You have to be fighting fairly decent fighters. You also have to keep earning money. So you can't stay active against Joe Blogs or gatekeepers or journeymen. You have to fight pretty tough tests. And once you've been mandatory for a long time, as Joyce was and as Dillian Whyte was, you're eventually going to run out of the eminently beatable top contenders. That's what happened with Dillian Whyte, I feel. He withered on the vine. He fought loads of people and then eventually he lost to Povetkin. And he was good enough and he made the right adjustments that he could beat Povetkin in the return. And I know there was questions about Povetkin's health as well. We won't go into that right now. But with Joyce, it's the same thing. He cleared out some of the top contenders, solidified his position as WBO number one, but then he wasn't quite ready to take on Usyk yet. The WBO mandatory wasn't the next one in the rotation. So he still has to make money. He still has to stay active, and it still needs to be against someone good enough to sell out a show and to put good fighters on the undercard. Now, Zhang, you can say, was the wrong choice, but it'd be interesting to see, and we can put this out to the chat, who should Joyce have fought while waiting for Usyk? Because I know they wanted it to be a southpaw as well, because they wanted to get him ready. He hadn't fought any as a pro. They wanted to get him ready for the southpaw style of Usyk. And Usyk and Zhang are very different, but they are both left-handed. So who should he have fought instead? R. Senior says, head guards in pro boxing? Absolutely not. It won't be boxing. Sorry, R. Senior, but you're not the young man either. So we're gonna let Danny Gilfillan be the authority on that question. more about head guards. Del says you have to stay active, waiting for your shot. You end up having ring rust, but lack of fights will also be a factor. That's true. Thunder Road asks, what happened to DeBella's Digest? Did you have a falling out? No falling out. Unfortunately, nothing that dramatic. I wouldn't want to fall out with Lou DeBella, would you? No, we were doing it regularly during the pandemic, and I think Lou's just a lot busier now. And every kind of couple of months, someone asks about it, and I'll go back to him and say, we need to start the Digest again. When do you want to do it? And he says, yeah, great idea. Let's do it on Wednesday or whatever. And then the next time I'll text him, don't hear back for 2 months. So I don't mean to put all the blame in Lou's direction, because I should probably message him a bit more often than I do. But yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed doing them, so I would like to see it back at some point. Del says Otto Wallin would have been a great fight for him, and so does Scotty 70. Joyce should have fought Wallin. So we'll get on to that in a minute, who should Joyce have fought. But Danny, while we're getting more chats coming in, it's time for your big moment. Head guards in pro boxing, yay or nay?
No. I think that would be a step too far. I'm pretty opposed to this sort of like neutering of sport. We're starting to see like kids not being allowed to head a football and stuff like that. I think it's more about being proactive and sort of noticing problems before they develop, as opposed to taking away what the sport actually is. And there's sort of the jury's sort of out on how much head guards prevent sort of brain injuries. I mean, I know you're less likely to get knocked out, but you're still taking thuds to the head. So not for me. No, I think you do need that distinction, and I think it would take a lot away from professional boxing if they were wearing head guards.
Yeah, I mean, I've been sparring regularly for about 3 years. Doesn't mean I'm any good, by the way, in case you're wondering. But I've never worn a head guard. Well, not since I first went into a gym and first sparred, but yeah, just doing it kind of privately. Never worn a head guard. I don't like it. I think it gives a false sense of security. I also think it harms your peripheral vision, which is not a good thing. So you end up taking more shots. I think your perception, your distance perception is better without one as well. But that's just personal experience. And obviously I'm not sparring regularly enough or at a good enough level to worry too much about CTE and so on. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you in the main. Teach says, what's worse in your opinion, a quick KO or to sustain damage? I think long sustained damage. I think the most fatalities we've seen in boxing are generally linked to dehydration, but also tend to be in long, grueling fights where they've sweated a lot, become further dehydrated, took lots of cumulative punishment without the fight being stopped. Because you're hitting an object in the brain or an organ in the brain over and over again. If you're hitting it around the same spot, you're obviously losing fluid as well at the same time. It's just not a good thing, is it? And getting knocked out is never a good thing either. And you can get damage from that. You see some really nasty knockouts, of course, but it is a one and done. You know, you're punished, it's over, and your brain can begin recovering immediately. It's not the same as getting hurt, potentially concussed, and having to carry on boxing with a concussion. Because no fighter is ever going to go back to the corner, even if they're aware they've got a concussion, which often they won't be, and say, guys, you know, I think I've got a concussion. I think you should pull me out of this fight. I don't think we're ever going to see a boxer do that. You know, so sometimes boxers need saving from themselves. But I definitely think, you know, you'd rather not get either of the two, but lesser of two evils is to get clean knocked out, fight's over, start your recovery immediately. So back to Joyce and who he should have fought, because, you know, we've talked about who he should fight next, but I think Otto Wallin as a southpaw is a good kind of measuring stick. Maybe Dempsey McKean as well, before he got offered the Hrgovic fight, would have been a safer. But then it's iron sharpens iron, isn't it? So how much would that have prepared him for an Usyk? Would have we given Joyce a false sense of security by matching him with a lesser southpaw than Zhang, and then he goes in against Usyk and takes that punishing beating we've just been talking about? I'm not sure. What do you think, Danny? Who should Joyce have fought?
Otto Wallin was the name that jumped to my mind as soon as you mentioned the question. I just think you don't want to be... I know there was a lot of hysterics about Joyce's chin before the Zhang fight, but you still, like, promoter 101, like, if you're playing it safe, you've got a prospect coming up or a fighter in a good position, just don't put them in with a big puncher. Worst comes to worst, you can always job them on the cards, but you can't unknock them out. So I think that it was Wallin, like, makes a lot of sense. Similar dimensions to Usyk. I've seen people on social media describe him as like a wish version of Usyk, and I don't think that's too disaccurate. So that's one makes sense. McKean, as you say, another southpaw, although a lot sort of taller and longer than Usyk, and probably packs a bit of a punch as well. Obviously, nothing to the extent of Zhang, but hindsight's 2020. Danny, as you said, there wasn't many people picking Zhang, and a lot of people maybe envisioned sort of struggles early for Joyce, but very few were sort of thinking that Zhang would get him out of there. So I think maybe we were all, and that includes Joyce's team, just maybe getting a bit carried away back then.
We were saying it earlier, is it Zhang or Zhong? But if it's Zhong, it'd have to be like Big Bong Zhong. Big Bong Zhong, perhaps, if you want to move into a different area of public life. Tony Outdoors says, at 54, I thought about going back to the boxing gym. I was a decent amateur, but just for fitness and teaching, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I'm 42. I love it. Yeah, I know I look younger. Stop it. But yeah, it must be the boxing. It's not my face into some sort of shape. But no, I love it. I love boxing training much more than any other form of fitness I've ever done. You know, I've done weights gyms. I do running sometimes as well, but nothing compares to boxing for me. It's the being in the present element of it, particularly inspiring. You know, you haven't really got time to think. You have to kind of lose yourself in the moment to be safe or relatively safe. So yeah, just a little aside there. Gadget Man Chris says, is the next fight for Joyce the Triple D rematch once he's had a rest? Yeah, we talked about this a little bit earlier. Might not be the best fight for Frank Warren because there's no real win for him in that situation except for the event itself. But yeah, I think that's probably what they'll move him towards. Untitled Bobby C said was going to say McKean. Great minds think alike. Strangingness says Joyce isn't done, but he made a huge mistake with the rematch clause. Yeah, but I think even if there wasn't a rematch clause, he lost his WBO interim title and as such the WBO #1 ranking. The WBO are probably going to call their mandatory early next year, so he needed to be back in that position to get a world title fight regardless. Even without a rematch clause, he kind of was backed into a corner. He would have had to fight Zhang again anyway. Untitled Bobby C again says, I didn't think Zhang was that big a puncher, seeing as he couldn't get Hrgovic out of there. Maybe that was their thought process. I think Hrgovic was smart enough and good enough technically and also with a strong enough jab and defense to stay out of harm's way enough for the first 5 or 6 rounds. And then he obviously came on a bit stronger as Zhang faded. So I don't think that underlines that Zhang's not a puncher. I think Joyce has looked very durable in previous fights before these last 2. So I think we have to accept that the Chinese power is real. Ronish Shretha says, let's be honest, chat, Joyce foot movement is not there. Hard to disagree. He's like a George Foreman. Yeah, well, maybe he can invent a kitchen appliance when he retires from boxing and make loads of money there. HBO aren't around anymore, so he can't be a pundit for them. Teach says Joyce's huge flaw is his speed, or lack of, I'm guessing. He can train to improve it. That should be his focus. How much can you improve speed, though, particularly hand speed at the age of what? Is he 38? Can't be easy, can it? I mean, I can't do it at 42, but I never had it to begin with, so... plus his reaction time when defending. Yeah, I mean, I thought that was pivotal in the Zhang rematch. I thought, trying to parry. Matty Clarkson, former pro, said on Twitter that he never should have been trying to parry the left hand with his right anyway, because it's obviously not closest to the target. But whether that is what he was trying to do, it certainly seemed like it. And he was much too slow to do so. Jump Tube says, in regards to the rotation, where is it written that the WBC, for example, can tell the WBO when the WBO is allowed to stage a fight for their title? Isn't this just another way to prevent fights? They can't tell them exactly when to do it, but the 4 bodies have agreed with undisputed champions on a rotation basis of who gets to call the mandatories in what order. That doesn't mean they can say, right, you're doing it on this date with this opponent or anything like that, but it does mean they have to take turns. It's kind of it's not perfect, but it seems to be the most sensible way to handle it when you've got undisputed champions. And that seems to be a fashion that seems to be coming back into fashion now, having an undisputed champion. Teach says his hand speed to be specific. Yeah, quite right. Scotty70 says Big George had a defense, Big Joe doesn't. I wouldn't say he doesn't have a defense. He's always got by with a higher guard and being an aggressive fighter. His kind of offense was his defense, as the saying goes. But yeah, I think at this stage, going in with the more technically adept and the faster handed boxers, it's going to be difficult for Joe, I think. And yeah, I mean, I've made my feelings clear about what he should do next, but the decision has to come from him. Now, enough of looking back. It's time to look forward. And while we've got 2 huge UK shows happening on Saturday night, huge might be overstating it, actually. I feel I've gone into hyperbole mode. But there are 2 shows on TV happening in the UK. I'm going to the press conference for the Matchroom show on Thursday. That'll be my big day out for the week. They don't let me out very often anymore, wisely. But what we've also got on Saturday night, one I'm not going out for, but perhaps wish I was, we've got Radio Raheem out there with our ace cameraman and producer, Frank Trevitt, is Canelo. Nice to see him back again, of course. This time, bit of a left field opponent when it was first announced, Jamel rather than Jamal Charlo, the smaller of the two, or has been competing at a lighter weight. Undisputed champion, just like Canelo, but at 154 pounds to Canelo's 168. Stepping up 2 weight divisions. It just seems to me, Danny, as this fight's got closer, people seem to be giving Charlo a lot more of a chance than they were when the fight was first talked about.
Yeah, definitely. I give Charlo a chance in the fight, to be honest. I think you do still have to make Canelo a favourite, but I think it's been clear from his last 3 fights, certainly the Bivol fight into Golovkin and then Ryder last time out, that he's not quite the destructive force he once was. And 63 professional fights, fighting professionally since you're 15. I mean, it's no surprise. And then to add on top of that, the sort of fluctuating between weights he's been doing, and had a bit of injury problems last year as well. So Charlo will be the fresher fighter, the fighter closer to his prime. Obviously, you'd imagine there'll be a bit of a weight difference in there, but Charlo's got advantages. I looked a lot taller than Canelo when they faced off at the last press conference. A lot bigger reach too, I'd imagine. So I'm actually really looking forward to it. I think it's an interesting fight.
Yeah, I just realised as you were talking there that Canelo Charlo is a perfect opportunity to put out a poll, because we are 50 minutes into SO Live this week and haven't done a poll. So you can tell that I'm struggling without aim, and that's what I'll put it down to. But yeah, Mod Mother Quiver, if you can hear me, can you please put out a poll? Canelo versus Charlo, who wins? We'll keep it simple, and we'll see if you guys can all get your votes in as quick as possible before we dash off. But yeah, I think it is an intriguing fight. I make Canelo a healthy favourite. At 168, that seems to be his best weight. He's never lost at 168. His defeats have come above and below. There's flaws. He's clearly got flaws that Bivol underlined when he defeated him. And Charlo shares some qualities. He's got a good jab. He's rangy. He's technically skilled. He's got a level of explosive power. It's whether that has the same impact up at 168 as it does at 154. And also against someone like Canelo, who's proven since his very early days to have something of an iron chin. So I don't know. I think some of the things that Charlo relies upon to win fights down at 154 is his physical prowess, is his strength and his power. I'm not sure that'll be as effective 2 weights higher, especially against someone who's robust, strong, gritty at times when he needs to be, like Canelo. Canelo is the A side in this fight for a reason and the favourite for a reason. And I would expect him to stop Charlo mid to late rounds. But it is an intriguing fight, and it's a cracking undercard as well, I have to say. Your Dennis Ugas against Mario Barrios may be the pick of that undercard, although the Erickson-Lubin fight is really good too. What do you make of the show as a whole, Danny?
Yeah, really, really good. The 2 fights you touched on there, and then the debut of sort of Mayweather's next protege, that Carmel Moton. He looks a very exciting prospect, very good amateur, and sort of blowing up on social media. I think Mayweather gained a bit of traction for him when he said he would throw him in with Lee Wood on his debut. So I'm really looking forward to watching him as well. It's a really good card, worth staying up for.
Yeah, I think so. But what if Canelo does get past Charlo, and we assume Charlo can either go back down, defend his belts at 54, although as we've seen with numerous fighters, including Roy Jones going up to heavyweight or Kell Brook going up to middle for Golovkin, it can be a struggle to get back down to the weight in which you were previously dominant. But we expect Charlo to go back down maybe to middleweight, and he still could do well there. This is if he loses. Obviously, if he wins, he may stay at 168. Who knows? But I'd imagine he'd want to go back to middleweight and try and become undisputed at 3 weights. But we shall see. On the Canelo side, though, if he emerges victorious, is the Bivol fight ever going to happen? The rematch? Do we think? It seems like his team are blaming Bivol's team and vice versa. Bivol doesn't look to be fighting Beterbiev anytime soon because of the whole ban on Russian fighters challenging for WBC titles. Will we ever see Canelo against Bivol 2? And if not, who do we want to see Canelo fight? Who are the big fights out there, the legacy-defining fights for Canelo, if not a Bivol rematch?
I don't think we're ever going to see the Bivol rematch. I mean, especially now that he's signed with Al Haymon and PBC, sort of put the final nail in the coffin for that one. I seen a thing the other week with Mauricio Suleiman. He claims that David Benavidez is going to be enforced as a mandatory as Canelo's next fight for the first half of 2024, which I would absolutely be buzzing to see. I think he's without a doubt the number one contender at super middleweight. I think stylistically he's a bit of a nightmare for Canelo. The one thing that I think I have noticed a decline in Canelo is his gas tank. He gassed against Bivol. He took his foot off the gas pretty significantly against Golovkin. And even against John Ryder, a fight he was dominating and there wasn't a great deal coming back. He faded towards the end. And Benavidez comes on so strong in the back end of fights. So if Mauricio Suleiman is a man of his word and enforces that fight, it'd be really interesting because there's a lot of people in the States who think Canelo doesn't really fancy that. And then the proof will be in the pudding if he vacates or fights him. So hopefully that's next.
Questioning the honesty of Mauricio Suleiman.
Never
thought this would happen on SO Live. Teach says, this is a good fight on paper. I have to favour Canelo since he's acclimated to the weight class and Charlo is not. Mel went to war with Castaño and Canelo is a step up from Castaño. That was a bit of a tongue twister in its own right. R.STR says, don't laugh. Can't promise. Joshua beats Fury. Fury doesn't hit hard enough for me. The coward Fury doesn't want it. I think we're both laughing now. Who's laughing now? Everyone. I'm not saying Joshua can't beat Fury. I mean, I think it's a good fight. I think I'll give him a chance, but I don't think Fury's scared of Joshua. I think it's the biggest money fight in the world for him, and it's one that he would expect to win. So yeah, I don't think he's avoided him at all. But it's a hard fight to make given the different promoters and broadcasters. Jump Shoe says, it's not sensible. This is the rotation for mandatory rotation for undisputed champions. It's not sensible because a fighter who is fourth in the rotation can end up having to wait 3 to 4 years to get their shot. This is just another straw man to keep contenders at bay while promoters drag. I'm not saying promoters don't use it for that reason, but I think the idea of having a rotation so that all the mandatories do ultimately get their shot isn't a bad thing. I think maybe there should be a time limit placed on it. You know, if you haven't fulfilled your WBA rotation, you move to the next governing body or sanctioning body in the list within 6 months, for example. It can be modified, but I don't think the principle is bad. Jump Shoe says, what does he say? Dragging their feet and making fights. The one fight year agony is killing boxing. Tony Outdoors says, Fury beats anyone, in my opinion. There's nobody that can beat Fury. I don't know if that's true, but I think if anyone's going to beat Fury, it probably is Usyk, and I still favour Fury to win that fight if I had to pick. But I think he's the one I'd give the most chance to, like if I was setting betting odds, for example. I just think Fury's so awkward, and he possesses a skill set that isn't commensurate with his size necessarily. It's, you know, things you'd expect to see from a much smaller, lighter man. He's fast of foot, fast of hand. He's tricky, he's awkward. He can fight southpaw and orthodox. But I think someone who's technically very skilled, someone who is an awkward southpaw in their own right, throws a lot of punches, presses the pace, and knows how to fight bigger people, which is, you know, a cruiserweight coming up to heavyweight and winning the world title from someone like Joshua, and then defending it against him, retaining it as well. I think that's the style that's got the most chance against Fury. But if I had to pick, I would still pick Fury. But at the moment, we're talking about Canelo, Charlo, and it was a snap poll. So let's see how many of you have voted. I'm a bit disappointed that only 18 people have liked this live so far as well, because we must have had hundreds of people in the chat at this point, and only 18 of you liked it. It's one click. Guys, come on. Do us a favour. Do us a solid. Canelo versus Charlo, who wins? Canelo 87%. Charlo 12%. Doesn't really reflect perhaps the discussion we've just had, but fair enough. When people having to make their decision, I guess it will be reflected in the bookmakers as well. But yeah, really appreciate that. Really appreciate the 18 of you who have liked the video. It's not too late if the rest of you can. Also appreciate everyone who's commented and asked questions. We've got through as many of those as we can. But yeah, really great that you've all tuned in once again. SO Live will be back at 5 o'clock next Monday, where we'll be looking back on Canelo Charlo to see if 87% of you were indeed correct. If not, 12% of you will be very smug indeed. And we will be looking ahead to whichever shows there are the following week, which will be the 7th of October. You might have to help me out with that, Danny. Is that KSI Fury?
I believe it is, yeah.
Wow. Big fights just keep on coming. I know that puts a few people off, but I imagine we will be leading with that next week. So I'll just warn you all in advance. If you want to boycott the show for a week, that might not be the week for you. I don't know. But but thanks all for tuning in. Danny, any closing remarks from your good self?
No problem. So I'm really happy to be on. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Anytime. Well, not anytime, because Eamon's probably coming next week. We want to reclaim his seat, but don't want to give his job away that easily. But yeah, really appreciate you filling in for Eamon. And yeah, he should be back with us next week. We'll see how his time away from boxing has affected him. But yeah, thanks all for tuning in and see you all soon. Cheers.